Good evening to everybody, to those of you joining us from India, and good morning to participants in the United States. I am U.S. Consul General David Rands, and I would like to welcome you to our panel discussion on exploring successful gender-friendly workspaces. During my tenure in Mumbai, almost 20 months now, I have made it a priority to look for opportunities to galvanize action that addresses gender inequity in the workforce. Today's discussion is one of many ways we are working with the business community, think tanks, and government partners to inspire progress on this issue. I want to express my appreciation to the Observer Research Foundation, and in particular to Aditi Ratho, for working so quickly and expertly in putting this panel together. When I met Aditi in February, and we got to the topic of her research into workplace challenges for women, I knew we had found the right partner for an event I had long been mulling. Aditi proved me right. In a matter of weeks, she secured participation by the IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Tata Group, and Avalon Consulting to complement our own efforts to include Cummins and Dow India in this event. And recognizing that a successful program only comes about from the work of many hands, I would also like to thank Akshay Mathur, Dhaval Desai, and Karan Kumar of ORF for their work behind the scenes. Let me also express my great appreciation to our speakers today, Rajiv Podar, Chandra Nayak, Anupama Kaul, Priyadarshini Gupta, Raj Nair, and Mitala Mukherjee, for taking the time to share their experiences in striving to establish more gender-friendly workspaces. As many of you likely know, during my travels around Western India, whenever I visit a company, whether Indian or American, I ask what percentage of its workforce is comprised of women, and what measures the company's leadership has taken to increase that number. I have been inspired by the many companies I've visited, including a number who are participating today, that have not just committed to women's economic empowerment and the advancement of women into executive roles, but have taken concrete steps to translate this commitment into reality. Whether it's the installation of restaurant facilities or attention to safe transit, the modification of equipment, or the purposeful placement of women in leadership positions, some companies have found and are implementing successful formulas to increase the participation of women in their workforces, from the plant floor to the sales office, the guard force to the boardroom. Meanwhile, other companies have acknowledged to me that they are struggling to do so, raising some of the exact challenges that other companies have found ways to overcome, at least in part. I take on faith that these companies' desire to increase women's representation in their workforces is sincere, and that they lack only some practical tips from companies who've succeeded. It was this simple idea, pairing companies who have made progress in women's workforce participation with those that want to do better, that inspired today's program. I'm looking forward to a frank exchange of concrete ideas, and I hope this will launch some serious dialogues that will lead to concrete action. Before I turn things over to IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry President Rajiv Podar, I want to thank the participants for joining, all of you. Your presence here today signals a strong desire and intent to address what has been essentially a collective failure in global efforts to empower women to play an equal role in the workplace. Let me be clear. Addressing our collective failure to empower women in the workplace is a matter of justice and equity, but it also makes basic economic sense. No country can reach its full potential while excluding half its workforce from full and equal participation. According to the IMF, reaching gender parity would boost India's GDP by as much as 27%. And the World Bank reports that India's GDP growth rate would climb above 9% if women had an equitable share of jobs, and that India could boost its growth by 1.5 percentage points per year if just 50% of women could join the workforce. So, there's a compelling case based on justice, equity, and simple economics to have this conversation. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. Now, over to Rajiv.
Thank you, David. Thank you. What a great beginning to a very apt program. Good evening, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and I extend a warm welcome to the webinar on exploring successful gender-friendly workspaces in association with the U.S. Consulate Mumbai and Observers Research Foundation. I would like to compliment the U.S. Consulate General Mumbai and ORF for this wonderful and timely webinar. India continues to struggle to provide its women with equal opportunities. In 2019, before the COVID-19 pandemic, women labor force participation in India was merely 23.5% according to ILO estimates. The pandemic has made the situation worse. It has hit women disproportionately because they work in sectors that have been hardest hit, that is the informal economy and primary caregivers at home. As the recovery of the Indian economy requires a concerted effort of both government and citizens, women can become a critical part of the economic recovery. There is thus a need to improve on the long-standing issue that hampers female labor force participation in India. India's societal norms are such that women are expected to take care of and responsibility of family and child care. This is a crucial barrier to women's workforce participation. However, this is changing rapidly. In India, in 2019, the internet users were 67% male and 33% female, and this gap was even wider in the rural areas. This divide can become a barrier for women to access critical education, health and financial services, or to achieve success in activities or sectors that have become more digitalized. In the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Index, which measures gaps that exist in the economic participation of women, India slipped to 112th place this year simply because over 70 lakh Indian women have dropped out of work. To address this, it's important to build an ecosystem not only in the workplace, but also by policies, regulations, security and transport facilities. This requires changes in the mindset of the society at large. Many companies have zero tolerance policies committed to gender inclusivity in hiring and promotion processes, providing special facilities for women at workplace, proper maternity leaves, sanitary facilities, etc. The government has also taken steps with anti-harassment laws for prevention and prohibition and redressal of harassment against women. Some states have provided transport with surveillance cameras and security staff to safeguard the rights of our women and women workforce. However, a lot more needs to be done and to be enforced speedily and timely. Creating job opportunities is the need of the hour. Encouraging more women to become entrepreneurs will provide a long-term solution. By creating jobs, fueling innovation, and further investments in health and education, entrepreneurship among women could transform India's economy and society. As per the World Bank noted that no country can develop and achieve its full potential if half of its population is locked in non-remunerative, less productive and non-economic activities. We have a very eminent panel with wide experience who will give us insights on the same. In conclusion, I am reminded of a thought-provoking quote by former US President Barack Obama, where women are full participants in the country's politics or economies, societies are more likely to succeed. Let us work together to create a gender-friendly ecosystem so women and men can make the most of their potential for an inclusive future for all. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak today and for having IMC to partner with this event. I would just like to also mention that in IMC we have total 70 staff, out of which there are 34% are 34% are women. Sorry for that. And the IMC Ladies Wing extends their support for IMC and its Ladies Wing female staff members or the girl child for any employee only for their higher education. With this, I'll end and hand over to Mitali ji. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for laying out the agenda so wonderfully, both David and Rajiv. Great to hear the numbers, Rajiv, from IMC. And I'm hoping that 30% plus also constitutes your top management. That would be indeed great to see. It's also fantastic that we're having this conversation in the context of Women's History Month, because I think it's important to amplify these issues, especially when there is attention around them. Both of you made some extremely cogent points, both about the situation as it stands and what the data points to. So before I open this out to hearing more from our esteemed guests today, I want to set out some data points as well. And these are global in nature, and I think they're important to take on board with this conversation. Number one, women have experienced unprecedented job losses across the world because of the pandemic. One study of employment, and this is looking at fairly developed categories, including Italy, the United States, the United Kingdom, 6 to 8 countries, found that women are 24% more likely to have permanently lost their jobs versus men. The second piece of data is the fact that the pandemic itself has exacerbated an already existing pay gap between men and women. So in the EU, for example, women have lost close to 8% of their salaried income versus between 4 to 5% for men. And the third piece of data really is about not just talking about representation, but talking about which tier of representation women make it to. In the August 2020 Fortune Global list, 2.6%, that's 13 women, were actually at the level of CEO in the Fortune 500 companies. So I think this is not just a local challenge, it's a global challenge. And I think there's a lot of deep digging to be done, not just in terms of how to bring them into the workforce, but also how to ensure that they move from level to level within that workforce. With that said, welcome to our participants. I hope you enjoy what you're going to hear today, and I hope you come away with a lot of concrete data in terms of what you can put into place as good policies. We will have 10 minutes each for every presenter, after which we will have a Q&A session for about 20 to 25 minutes. So without further ado, let me invite up first to speak Chandrakant Nayak. He's CEO and President Dow India. Chandrakant, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me share my slides first. And I hope you all can see the slides. Can someone just confirm?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to thank David for inviting me to this great forum. And I also want to thank ORF for creating such a nice platform for discussing this one of the most critical issues, or I wouldn't call it issues, opportunities for us to really developing a workplace that is inclusive for women. Our fundamental belief from Dow is a more inclusive culture attracts diversity and allows people to bring their whole self to work. Without proper inclusion and without the diversity, we lack these elements at work and cannot bring creativity, cannot tackle the issues and problems that we have to work on. Inclusion has been a fundamental strategic priority for us. So for our key goals, customer centricity, sustainability, inclusivity, and innovation. These are 4 pillars, and probably one of the biggest focus areas in the recent times have been around inclusion. And while we take pride in saying that our solutions are reshaping our world and we are really good at developing the best solutions, people are heart of it. And we had run the campaign of human element few years back. And we are now taking the journey further that diversity is really our strength, and diversity cannot bring us the benefits or value unless inclusion is addressed. And gender equality and gender inclusion is the biggest area that we work on. So building an inclusive culture is a deliberate and conscious act. That is our belief. And what we at Dow, we focus on is first creating an infrastructure that is right infrastructure even before we onboard people. And especially for women, and I have a case study when I'll go to a little bit more specifics, right from the work environment to getting the office ready, getting the people ready, the culture in the right tone is extremely important when we are creating a workplace that is addressing the gender equality. The second important element, and some of the people also spoke about this. So policies plays a fundamental role. So we have been spending a lot of time in working on the right policies, and especially our policies are, many of them are localized. We have to take into account what is relevant to working women in India and make them align with the global policies or the framework, but have those designed specifically for India. And we have done a lot of progress on the policies. The third element, which is probably most critical, is continuous skilling and coaching. Just hiring women is not enough, because women need to have the career progression. And already Mithali shared some data points that at the only 2.6% of women are at the level of CEO. Why is it? Because unless we focus on skilling and coaching right from the day we hire women, they cannot be ready for the boardroom dynamics. And for this, each CEO and COO and the senior leadership is extremely important to align their thoughts and really set the right tone in the organization. So in Dow, we have made some I would say practices. We have tried few practices. So each senior leader is a sponsor for at least one employee resource group. And this means that we have employee resource group for women, but for inclusion, this is a very, very important commitment coming from the senior leadership. Also actively building diverse groups of key roles. So all our employee resource groups have representation from all the functions and all the sites and gender. We try to get gender equality, at least in the employee resource groups. Adapting processes and introducing initiatives to encourage women is a key element. And when we are designing the policies and procedures, we have to keep in mind the diversity and inclusion at every aspect of our policies and working. And we participate heavily in many of the peer industries, how they are, what are the best practices, and we try to replicate them and also share some of the good practices that our team has been able to nurture and come up with other companies. And there is a continuous learning, and in building the equality, building the workplace that is more inclusive for women, I think this learning is very, very important. If we can share good practices with others, there will be more advocates for women employees and setting the right infrastructure and creating the right workplace for environment for them. And lastly, dedicated employee resource group to build inclusive culture. I believe that we need to have not just the employee resource groups for women, but also leadership teams which are only represented by women, where they get their space, where they can voice their concerns. They can also participate in all these three areas of framing policies, creating the infrastructure, and skilling and coaching. So some of the things which we have done in India, first of all, our Women's Inclusion Network has been active for many years. And this is a global network. And in India, this has been active for more than 20 years. This is where the we create champions for women inclusion. And the ERGs, the employee resource group, they really act as a catalyst to create the culture and also drive inclusion. And these employee resource groups are empowered to have their own agenda. They have their budget, and we have many employee resource group. And for women and diverse group LGBTQ, they are one of the most active resource groups. Secondly, we need to walk the talk. So when we need to understand just having equal policies or policies that are equal for all is not going to help. Women need special support, and they have special requirements, and we need to address that. That's why flexible working hours or having maternity leave, child care support, and so on, so many other things are very, very important. So we are moving the needle from equity to equality. And for this, sometimes we need to increase the amount of benefit for women, but it is very important to do. So Project Catalyst, we have also designed it specially for working women who take a break during when they have a family, they take a break. And for them coming back, we need to really create an inclusive environment and also have a policy that is fully supporting their re-entry into the. Last piece, the advancing the potential both internally and in the community. I think we take a lot of pride and we give a lot of importance to leadership development programs. And we have very special programs, especially for design for women internally. Also, we launched another program last year, which was to develop the women engineers at the time they are in the last year of their last semester of their career or of their academic career. And this program has been very successful, and we just concluded the first wave of this. And this really gives them a different perspective from what they need to do when they get into the industry and some of the realities. The Project Putri is more on supporting financially. But last, I want to share the case study about women in manufacturing, which is very, very special for us. And why I'm saying this. When we hired first women in at the shop floor, we came to know that some of our equipments were not optimized for women to handle. Some of the switches, switchboards, they were designed for certain height of people or certain nature. So we had to rework some of the designs, accessibility, and comfort in handling equipment. Also, the long-term commitment, we were really looking at women for short-term roles initially, but we are now very, very focused on how we can keep giving them career opportunities and not just making them stay in the workplace, because that is where they join. So this is very important. So we have to ensure their safety, we have to ensure their training and upskilling. And what I must say that in the leadership, from the leadership side, the site leader plays an extremely important role. Site leader is deeply involved in ensuring the safe work environment and also the policies and infrastructure development. So there is a commitment from top management. So some of the photographs you can see there is a work happening where women are working in handling the equipments that some of the other companies may find it very difficult for women. And this is showing up in some of the accolades that we have received last year. We have been last 5 years getting in top place for working for women. We are rated as in Avatar Working Mother in 100 Best Companies for Women, and we have also received the Exemplars Award for Most Inclusive Companies for Women. So that's a quick short brief from my side. Thank you very much.
Chandrakant, thank you so much for that. That was a fascinating brief, but very, very fascinating presentation. I mean, I already have so many questions to ask you about skilling, about this bridge from education to careerhood, and of course, the very fantastic point you made about designing. I'm sure everyone knows that example of where most car companies across the world to this day test airbags only with male mock-ups. They do not test it on a woman, and I think design is something we need to think so carefully about. Let me quickly introduce our next speaker as well, Priyadarshini Gupta, who's diversity and inclusion lead at Tata Group. It's a pleasure to have you here, Priyadarshini. Please take it.
Thank you so much, Mitali. Firstly, thank you so much for having me here for this conversation. It's always interesting to talk about inclusion and talk about gender inclusion at various levels. It makes it even more special because I learned my tricks and I owe much of what I know of inclusion to Cummins. So having Cummins here, Anupama is an old colleague. I know her, I've worked with her. So to me, it's a huge pleasure to be here on the same platform and talk about gender inclusion. You know, I joined Tata Group about a year and a half back, but whoever, you know, when you start talking about D&I and the Tata Group, it's like getting into really big shoes, you know, because our founders, I mean, our entire business is stands on social inclusion, So then what D&I do I do? It's something that you really worry, you really think about, and it kind of puts D&I at a very critical and a very integral part of how every business transaction is done. At the same time, we need to be mindful that there is a lot of change that one needs to bring into the system, and that's what we currently are trying to do through the work that we are doing. Of course, keeping alive the legacy that our founders gave to us. Karan, can I ask you to put my presentation on, if that's possible? Aditi, can you help me on doing that? I'll just continue. Yeah. So, of course, there are many stories of how social inclusion is a very key part of the Tata Group. But especially because we are talking about gender and gender inclusion and exploring gender-friendly workplaces, I picked up two stories that would be most relevant in this platform. The first story is about, I would request you to go to the next slide, please, Karan. So the next one, please. Thank you. The first story is about Lady Meherbai Tata, and this it goes back to the First World War, and she used to stay in the south of Mumbai, and she was seeing that there were a lot of poor people in and around her building who were not getting access to vegetables. And that kind of perturbed her a lot. And she said, you know what, let me become a vegetable vendor, let me source vegetables, let me go stand there and let me start selling these vegetables. And she thought it was a brilliant idea. It was indeed a brilliant idea. And she went to the then police commissioner and said, you know what, I need to understand what are the requirements, what kind of permits do I require? I want to become a vegetable vendor and I want to sell. The police commissioner was very surprised, and he really didn't know how to handle this. There was this really a very well-known lady from a very well-established family coming and wanting to become a vegetable vendor to sell vegetables to the poor. So he said, ma'am, you know what, we will take care of the situation and you can do charity. You just pay for the vegetables will reach. Why do you want to go there and, get your hands dirty? And what she actually said was what is written over here. She said, we are here to be useful and not graceful. And she did get the permit to sell vegetables, and she did sell vegetables way back in the during the First World War. So you see this, and Lady Meherbai Tata is also known as an icon of Indian feminism in many platforms and in many conversations. So these are the kind of examples that we live by and we need to keep up. When I look at gender-friendly workplaces, what strikes me is also ergonomics, infrastructure. Again, another small story to tell you how inclusive the Tata Group, the legacy that we kind of have inherited. Karan, if you can shift to the next slide, please. You see this picture. Now, this picture dates back to 1870s. This is Empress Mill, and this is a daycare center. I mean, there is nothing more to be said over here. Way before we were talking about women emancipation, our founder was creating organizations that not only did welfare for women, but looked at, let's take PF, let's take medical assistance, let's take leave. There are so many, and I can go on and on and on, but that's not the point. The whole point I'm trying to make over here is we inherit such a rich legacy, and D&I and inclusion and gender inclusion is such a key part of our work that it kind of becomes, or it makes us who we are. Saying that, sometimes it's tough living up to a legacy. Sometimes it's tough when you have something as large as this and as great as this, that is there to guide you. So in the next few slides, I will try and say what we are trying to do and what we are attempting to do to keep this legacy alive. It's a very tough one, and that's why I said the shoes that we are filling are huge shoes. It's a very tough one. Moving on, Karan, if you can go to the next slide, please. The next one. So now when we look at the Tata Group currently in today, we are more than 7 lakh, large number across the world. We have 10 industry segments. We have over 60 nationalities work with us. We have presence in over 50 countries. Now that's how diverse our employee base is. And hence, when we look at creating gender friendly, or when I look at gender friendly workplaces, to me, I think there is a clear segregation of how we address it through hardware infrastructure policies and how we address it through software or mindsets. Now, when I look at our companies, each of our company itself is a mammoth company. Let's take Tata Steel, let's take Titan, let's take Tata Motors, let's take Tata Power. And each industry is so different that sitting at a group center creating policies will never work. And hence policies and infrastructure is completely what is run by companies, individual companies. Saying that, there are many of our companies that have amazing policies around women and who have, in fact, what I'll do is when I step back and I look at the kind of work that the Tata Group is doing in D&I, I think more than 70-80% is in the space of gender. And that is reflective of the marketplace. I think when I pick up a slice of the Indian marketplace, 70 to 80% of the companies are mostly dwelling in the space of gender, and so also the same, it's fairly reflective of the marketplace. Tata Group is also doing that. So whether it is Tata Steel, whether it is Tata Motors, whether it is Tassel, that is Tata Aero Defense, whether it is IHCL, whether it is Tata Power, whether it is Tata Click, we do have a lot of policies and we do have a lot of special policies that have been created to ensure that women are enrolled in from the base up to the leadership levels. I'll mention a few policies here. I will not get into infrastructure because I think things like creche are no longer, it's hygiene, right? Everyone does that. So I will not get into that. Ergonomics, yes, there have been places where on the shop floor, there have been requirements of ergonomics so that women can work, and that has been done. This would particularly be pertaining to Tata Steel mining as well as Tassel, that is Tata Air Defense. We have policies. We have women who work in mines in a place called Noamundi in the backyards of Jharkhand. We have something like a Rahat leave. A Rahat leave is actually a menstrual period leave that is given to the women so that they can take a day off during their menstrual periods. We have policies like primary caregiver policies at Tata Communications that look at giving equal I would say space to both men as well as women when it comes to caregiving and rearing of children. Then we have the Tata Steel Women of Metal program, which actually looks at taking women, whether they be for the mines or for the Tata Steel shop floor, or at a task level, at a managerial level, and growing them into leaders. So that's another program that you see. Starbucks in India, again, there's a story that I will be sharing with you. Starbucks in India has, in fact, across the globe, we have the first all-women stores, and that's only in India. So that's with Tata Starbucks, which is you have two in Bombay and two in Delhi. They have special mentoring programs that have been designed for the women in the retail segment, especially the fast retail and cafe segment, because that's another area where women don't want to join because of certain stigmas, certain stereotypes that are there in the society. So working with families in those scenarios to be able to break the stereotypes and get more women on board is another program that the Tata Starbucks have. Similarly, there is upskilling that is done at the tassel, where you have women who come in from the ITIs and then they go through a certain upskilling program so that their employability gets enhanced. At the same time, they kind of start working on the shop floor at tassel. So these are some of the policies, and I can go on the whole list of policies that are there with our various group companies that ensure that we are creating the right environment or right space for women to get included into the workspace. Now, what do we then do at the group center? How do we complement, how do we supplement the whole thing? What we do largely is around the software bit, is the mindsets. I think 80% of the work that we do is around enabling change in mindsets, behaviors, breaking stereotypes. Here, and I will put pressure on breaking gender stereotypes, questioning gender roles. How do we do that? We do that through programs. So we have several programs, and I'll talk about it. We do it through communication, and we do it through conversation. So these are three ways in which we drive it from a central level. In programs, we have programs. So when you're working and when you're creating gender equal workplaces, you need to work on mindsets. You need to work with men as allies. You need to work with women too. You need to help women break the self-limiting beliefs that they have that, oh, I cannot do it. Oh, I will not be able to do it. And for that, we have two things. We have our signature program called Breakthrough Series, which is a series of program for women at middle to senior level, and very senior level, that help women through a journey of about between 2 to 4 months, through coaching, through development, through webinars, through conversations, gamified solutions, help them to unbox the potential and break the self-limiting beliefs that they have in their minds. We also have a network, a women's network called We at Tata, which is for all the women, and that kind of goes across the hierarchy, that helps them see a role model and creates a safe space to kind of work on themselves. We work with men as allies through various programs. Programs were called, things like Being an Authentic Leader, where we look at how as a leader can I be more vulnerable so that I can accept not only people who are different than me, but also women in my teams. We also do programs like Walk in My Shoes, which are also, the name is very evident. It talks about how do I, as a manager, get into the shoes of a pregnant woman and see how she feels and how she experiences a work day. So there are various programs like this that are designed very, very deliberately and very mindfully curated, that address to break or initiate a dent in mind, thought processes, which will allow women to not only stay but grow within the Tata universe. Communication, again, another piece where we do a lot of films. We do a lot of interesting videos, and I have one to share with you at the end of my 10 minutes, through which, again, we subtly nudge men as well as women to break their mindsets, to be able to accept differences, to be able to accept things that are not so familiar with us. So I think through software and through hardware, that's how we try to attempt to keep the legacy alive that we have inherited. Let's move on. Karan, if I can request you to go to the next slide. I'll just end with a few stories that inspire across the industry segment. If you can just move on, Karan, to the next slide. The first one, I spoke about this. This is the all women's Tata Starbucks. We have, okay, the slide is a little old. When I did the slide, we just had 2, now we have 4. So we have 4 stores across India. And mind you, these are across the globe. These are the only all women stores, and we have it at Tata Starbucks. Super proud of that. So that's one story. And it's quite a task because stores remain open till 10 o'clock and the actual store closes way back at 1 o'clock. So there is a lot of work that needs to get done post the store closes, and for women to stay, these young girls, these are all girls at the age of 18 to 22 when the parents want them to get married, and keeping them, engaging them and helping them grow is a task. It's one thing showing a slide, but there is a long story that goes in keeping them here. Let's move on to the next slide. The next story is a very interesting story of Tata Power, and I've just tried to show you the different industries and the different stories, of inspiration. This is for Tata Power Delhi, and this is another interesting space of social inclusion of women, where what was happening was people were, especially in slum areas, were not paying their bills, and they did not know how to handle the situation. So they started working with the women in the slums. They recruited those women as ambassadors who went from house to house in the afternoon, and they kind of spoke to the women in the house so that the bills, educated them about how to use electricity responsibly, and ensured that the bills were paid on time. So this became a fairly very strong case and a very strong case study that's there out in the market. So another story that inspires us. Let's move on. The next one is, of course, the Tejaswini program at the mining. I spoke about the mines. Noamundi, again, a way out place in Jharkhand. We actually have deployed our first 22 women heavy earth mover machineries, and they work on this, across all shifts. Of course, it has taken us a huge amount of work to make sure that they are able to work around 3 shifts and given them all the possible support that is there. But another story that we are super proud of. The fourth story that I will end with that is IHCL. Karan, if you can go to the next slide, please. We recently, and as recent as I think early March, we actually started our first all women's hotel in Chennai. It's Residence Taj Wellington Mews in Chennai. It's again an all women space operations, and this is just the first. I'm hoping we will have many more. There are many more stories I can go on, but that's not the idea. The idea is to end here. I will end with a small video, one of the videos that I talked about. It's just a 2-minute video, and then I hand it over back to Mithali.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Priyadarshini. In the interest of time, I'm going to go straight ahead to our next speaker, Anupama Kaur, who's APO HR leader at Cummins India. Just a quick word to our participants. If there's questions popping up already, please feel free to start writing them on the chat box, and I'll try and integrate them when we do have our conversation going. Anupama, let me hand over to you now.
Thank you so much, and it was great listening to Mr. Naik and Priya. Always a pleasure, and there's a lot that as an organization I completely resonate with. And it gives me a great pleasure to share the diversity, equity, and inclusion journey that Cummins has made, especially in India. I'm beginning with this slide so that I can just share with all of you that the seed for diversity and inclusion was laid while we were laying the foundation stone of our organization by our founder, J. Irwin Miller. So the commitment to diversity goes way, way long back, and we globally we are 100 years old organization. So you, just to give you a perspective of how committed the organization is towards this journey, which takes me to my next, that it naturally builds into our value system, and values are what we are and how we behave. So diversity and inclusion, which means that how do we really behave internally with our employees as with our external stakeholder. And for us, diversity and inclusion is all about valuing the different perspective and ensuring that we leverage those different perspectives to benefit the organization. So it definitely contributes to the bottom line of the organization, which I will quickly talk to you about the challenges that we have faced and how we have really addressed those challenges. I'll only, kind of touch base on things that I think we're doing differently, because a lot is very common with what the other panelists have already spoken about. Our biggest challenge has always been on attracting gender diverse talent, both at the shop floor and at the professional levels. It began for us by setting a leadership accountability. The leadership team has to have a complete engagement and commitment on driving the diversity agenda. When we began way back in 2005 or earlier than that, we also had matrices, because we knew what gets measured gets done. So it began there. We are very, very high on ours is a hire to develop strategy. So we have really leveraged our campus hiring pool, both for the professional and the shop floor employees, to get in the young talent, especially the gender diverse talent, and then groom them within Cummins and grow them into our organization. The next challenge, of course, is how do you integrate the gender diverse talent that you get into the organization? And the two things that I really want to talk about here is our policy. We have been working on defining policies like work from home, part-time working, way before even the pandemic actually hit us. So those policies were already in place. We moved to a maternity leave from 3 months to 6 months even before the government announced it. We have the paternity leave already built in. And the idea of paternity leave is how our male colleagues can then support their spouses, which means we are touching lives of women beyond those who are working with us. And of course, the second one that I really want to talk about is ergonomics, because that is critical for ensuring that we have the right representation of women at the shop floor. And I'm very proud to say that all our plants, all Cummins plants in India are today ergonomically viable, which will, of course, I'll tell you how we have benefited when I share my case study. And the third, of course, is how do you retain this talent? And like Priya said, mindset is such a critical thing to be really focused on. What we did in the organization was we ran these sensitizing and inclusion workshops across all our plants, across all our offices, to sensitize people on what we mean by the right environment, what we mean by the behaviors that we want every individual who works with us to demonstrate, which will project an inclusive work environment. What for us is zero tolerance. We have defined that pretty clearly, some of the behaviors which are completely zero tolerance for Cummins as an organization, because that impacts our journey on diversity and inclusion. The rest, of course, the others have spoken about, so I'm not really going to dwell there. I really want to spend a little time on one of our best practices that we as an organization are very proud of, is that we have our women working in second as well as in our third shift. The trigger for this happened was because we had huge customer demand, which meant that we had to run our operations 24/7. Now, in a normal circumstances, we would just hire a lot of male, ensure we're supporting the business and not impacting the customer demand. But that's not how Cummins saw it. We saw this as an opportunity to engage our employees across all the shifts, which means giving equal opportunity to both the genders to work throughout all the shifts and contribute to the organization, which also meant that we were being balanced even for some male colleagues. Otherwise, there would always be a discussion on saying that, hey, women get it easy because they just tend to work in general and first shift, and men have to really stretch to work towards second and third shift. While doing so, we faced a lot of challenges. I have just listed top three. One, of course, is driving alignment with all the stakeholders, which meant internal, which meant basically external, getting the required legal approval. We were so clear in our commitment to ensure that we give women the opportunity to work, to choose to work in second and third shift, that we started applying for the government approvals way back in 2010. It was after rigorous follow-up, the organization signing all kind of undertakings, that finally, after 2 years, that is in 2012, we got the permission to run a second shift with women. Initially, we got the permission only for 1 year because we kind of had a very good track record. We proved ourselves to the government officials too, with the measures that we had taken, that today all our plants have permission to get women in the second and third shift. And our plants are across different states in the organization in India. We have plants in Indore, Devas and Pithampur, in Maharashtra, in Jamshedpur, and we're very proud of that. While doing so, we had to also ensure the safety of our employees. So how do we really go about it? Of course, we did a lot of this communication with the plant team, helping them to understand the business case. We ensured that there is a complete buy-in by the leadership team, because it not necessarily can always be a top-down approach. It begins with a leadership commitment, but the commitment to diversity has to flow down the hierarchy. So we did that. In terms of the safety measures within the plant, we ensured that our plants were well lit. We ensured that every shift had women supervisors. The women who were coming in the shift were given the numbers of our drivers, guards, senior leaders. And of course, we are working towards ensuring that we have the best-in-class daycare center that we have. How does it become operational even in the third shift, so that women with children can also start participating? In terms of safety measures outside the plant, we of course have a door-to-door drop. Every bus and cab of ours has a woman lady, has a woman guard, security guard. We do a thorough background check for the guards and the drivers that we hire. And we ensure that every day there is a communication that comes back to us that the women has been dropped safely home. It's just become such a seamless process that now it looks very easy for us. But I know the amount of stress and work that the team had to do to reach there. The bigger part is also in terms of communication with the families. It is not easy to convince the families, but our teams made sure that they were reaching out to each of the family members, assuring them of the safety measures that we as an organization were taking, and then getting their buy-in, saying that they will try out. So there have been families, we have testimonial where the parent-in-laws have told us that, hey, we're going to try for a week or 10 days and then decide to really continue. And right now, like I said, we started our second shift way back in 2012. We've started third shift way back in 2016, and we are still successfully doing that. So these are some of the measures and the effort that we as an organization have to put in to ensure that we provide an inclusive work environment. These are some of the best practices, ergonomics, and Mr. Naik has shared similar stories, so I'm not really going to spend a lot of time here. It's very similar to DOG. We've also been doing the same things, ensuring that our the machines can be operated both by men and women. And obviously, if you make it economically viable, the men also benefit. What are the enablers at the end of it? I think the enablers to begin with is the leadership engagement and commitment. That is the key. There has to be a huge amount of commitment from the top leadership team to ensure that the agenda for diversity gets driven continuously, which means that you need continuous focus and review mechanism in place, because success does not come easy. Like I said, we applied for a second shift way back in 2010. It took us 2 years to convince the government to give us the permission, and now all our plants can operate. So that continuous focus and review mechanism to critically evaluate where you are in the journey, how much needle have you really moved, is very essential. From the top leadership team, it is very, very, very important to start cascading that commitment down to your managers. So the commitment has to flow down the hierarchy level. You need to make sure that the entire organization rallies behind you. So creating that compelling story and vision is very important. And of course, investing in individual development. There are various programs that Cummins does in helping the women grow. There are enough amount of internal parity analysis that we continuously do to ensure that we are not discriminating, even unconsciously, just based on gender or any other form of discrimination. This is my last slide, and I really want to talk about how we have benefited with all the efforts that we have been taking. I've been with the organization for 15 years. I can say minimum 15 years, and I know it's more than that. Today, we are very proud to see that Cummins has around 33% of women in our workforce. At a leadership level, just the top leadership level in Cummins in India, 50% of the businesses and functions are led by women. And these women are in talent. There are women leaders who joined us as interns, and then we laid out a clear career path for them. They've done different functions, and today they're proudly successfully leading the business and functions. And of course, one of the success stories, and why I call out this location, is because this is a location which is 110 kilometers away from Pune. The town is still not well developed. And while we were setting up, and we have all our plants, we call that a mega site for us because we have all our plants there now. We were challenged by external forums, saying you will not be able to even get 20% of women there. It's such an underdeveloped town, and women will not come and work. We are very proud that today, with our efforts, we have at least 26% of our women on the shop floor in that location. This is just a quick journey of how far we have come, which is because of the continuous focus and dedication. From 7% in 2005, and that's the last data point that I could get, to today being around 33%. But this is not where we want to stop. Our aspirational goal is 50%. We are very clear on that, because that is equally representing, we want to represent the society that we operate in, and 50% of the population are women. So why not have 50% of our workforce being women? So that's the aspirational, and we're very sure we'll achieve that. Lastly, and this is how I personally see this, is that we have really, in terms of gender diversity, we've really moved away from giving targets to leaders, and the reason why, because we started way back and we did have targets at that time, because it has really gained its own momentum in our organization. As far as gender diversity is concerned, it's just come so naturally to us now, it's in our DNA. So now we're looking at how we expand our diversity footprint in the regional side, because India is such a large country, and there are so many regional and cultural nuances that also leads to discrimination. The generational diversity are 60 to 70% of our population, Cummins population, is millennials. So how do we bridge that gap? And of course, the LGBTQ plus community. How do we make sure that we are an organization that is inclusive and they feel safe enough to work with us? So that is all that I really wanted to share with this panel. Thank you for the time.
Anupama, thank you so much for that. I think there was so much, granular information in that, really even personally for me to take away. And I think the most telling statistic was the growth that we saw between 2019 to 2020, where you've not just maintained your female workforce, but improved it marginally. So, kudos to the organization for preventing women from falling out of the workforce in a year that was really difficult on many people and on women specifically. Let me now, shine the light on Raj Nair, Chairman of Avalon Consulting. Raj, welcome. We'd love to hear what you have to share.
Thank you. Good evening to everybody. I'm very happy to be on this distinguished panel, and also I'm happy that I'm speaking after many experts have done so. The three presentations were amazing. The kind of experiences they brought and shared is fantastic. I don't have a prepared presentation because I knew I was the last presenter, and it would have reduced my ability to change the content and to avoid repetition, and therefore speak on a few limited points and not on all aspects of this vast subject. We seem to be a group of panelists who are all on the same side of the great divide that separates those who are convinced that gender equality is important at the workplace, and the people who have, for reasons of their own, have biases and feel there's no need for gender equality. It could be because of their cultural moorings which have created it, but the point is, it is true. We believe it's unfair to put people at a disadvantage merely because of an accident of birth by which they belong to one gender or the other. It should not be acceptable in any sane society, but it is not how the cookie crumbles. The fact is that we on this panel are a very tiny minority in India who genuinely think that way. The companies which are presented are the enlightened companies, but there are hundreds and hundreds of companies which don't think that way. So it leaves me with two questions. One is, what does it take to grow our tribe, to get people from the other side to cross over to our side? And second is, what positive action can we take to make gender equality happen across the country and not just in some really enlightened companies? The first requires advocacy, especially in the other territory. But it's not as simple as broadcasting by the Voice of America in the mid-50s, 1950s and 60s, when they used to beam their messages to influence citizens of other countries which are opposed to the liberal American way of thinking. In the current case, it's all entangled. We have the people who have the other viewpoint within the same city, within the same buildings, within the same companies, and probably some even within the same families. So we need a different kind of messaging to make sure that people understand and are sensitized to the fact that it is a woman's right to have equal rights at the workplace. So we do today, thanks to a lot of technology, we have a veritable smashboard of options. I will not go into that because I'm sure there are better people than I to address solutions for that. So let's go to the other aspect, that is walking the talk, which is as important as spreading the message, because nothing is as powerful as a believer doing what he or she believes in, whether it's in our homes or in the offices, in the factories, or in our circle of friends. We believe as partners in Avalon Consulting, or in the group itself, not just Avalon Consulting, all three companies, we believe in gender equality at home, and in our three companies, it shows in the way we interact with each other, the way we work, the pay and promotion opportunities are all the same. And it's easy because we are a services group. We don't have the challenges of manufacturing, which the other three presenters explained. Our friends too are similar in nature. So we have maternity and paternity leave as per government rules, and not just on paper, but we actually follow them in spirit. So I was very proud that we have that one company has 35% women and the one with the highest is 47% women. So I was feeling quite happy to talk today on gender equality at the workplace. Since I thought we had walked the talk. A couple of nights ago, I decided to talk to my son and daughter, who are very vocal about this subject. And I thought they'll be very sympathetic to what I had to say about how we run our company. And I definitely didn't expect my nose to be bloodied. But the issues they brought up to me were telling. So I'm trying to explain our weaknesses. The 3 presentations were about the strengths that you brought to bear. But the question I was asked was, how many female partners and board members are there in your companies? They knew the answer was zilch. So they said, why didn't you ask why? It's not enough to have parity at the lower and middle levels. If both genders thrive at lower levels, what is it that prevents women from rising to the board level or the partnership level? We hadn't thought about it. We were just so happy that we were close to 50%. And we thought we were doing a great job. And this made me think. And I thought I should tell you how we have failed there. We don't have a single person at the junior or senior partner level. The other question I was asked is, do you realize that a woman has multiple roles and which cannot be compartmentalized into roles that can be performed during the office hours and the other set which is outside office hours? Very often they have to handle multiple roles and often at the same time. So how does it help if you only have gender equality? So I'll go back to the first Chandrakant Naik's point about gender equity and not gender equality. So that's the point which is driven home to me. He said, look, you have to do something more because their challenges are more. So you just don't relax and think that you're doing a great job by being very fair, transparent, equal. Equal is not good enough. Have you made it possible for senior women to avail of the required flexibility without appearing it to be a favor which they seek every now and then? The honest answer is yes. There are quite a few people at the senior level, not at the partner level, who have got tremendous flexibility, whether even before COVID. Okay, and so that's good. But the question asked me, do you have any easy access to creche? No. Do your toilets for women have facilities for taking a child? The answer is no. So it set me thinking that we are falling short and we have no right to feel good about 35 to 47% of all the employees are women. So the other question was, have you taken any steps to create a couple of deserving role models in your company at the very senior level, whom other younger women can aspire to emulate and reach the partner level? The answer is, really, I haven't thought about that seriously. And after listening to the 3 presentations, I'm convinced that we need to do something there too. If all this is done, gender parity and gender equity will happen even at the senior most level. It's not that we don't want senior partners and women partners. We invite them to some meetings, but we haven't done enough to let them rise to that level. In fact, I had a call with 3 or 4 senior women today and asked them, why is it that we're not able to get them to the board level? And I had some interesting insights, which I have shared with you. Now I realize that there's a lot more that progressive-minded companies like ours still have to do. It is not only for companies to make a workplace conducive to women thriving and realizing its full potential. It's just not only companies that do it. There's a role for government also, which the government's role has to go beyond enacting laws and making rules. In many companies, the interviewer asks not so subtle questions when the lady candidate when are you planning to have a baby? I mean, such questions were asked in our company 5 years ago. Until 5 years ago, it's a shame. But now we don't allow such questions. But in many parts of the world, the government plays an active role to sort this problem out. For instance, in Lithuania, my daughter-in-law is from Lithuania, so she was telling me that the government pays 100% of the salary of a mother or father who sits at home for the full first year. The company doesn't pay. And the government pays 75% in the second year. Thus, a child has 2 years with parental attention, serious parental attention. The companies have to just grant leave and ensure that the reabsorption is smooth after 2 years. The government charges a social security tax, which is collected from the entire society and pays for these things, and society benefits. So there are many other countries, not just Lithuania, which is doing it. But I'm wondering whether our government also has to start thinking along these lines. Otherwise, we have a problem which is not getting solved fully. There's also a big role for society to play, because society sets expectations which stymie the women who want to be a good mother or daughter-in-law, but also to go beyond those roles. All this suppression happens in the name of tradition. Society builds a different set of expectations from the male child, and I've seen it happening. It's often the case that the girl child, despite doing extremely well academically, is not allowed to dream big like their brothers. How can we as a corporate sector sort that out or help alleviate this problem? There's a lot of talk these days about educating very young boys in gender equality and how to deal with women while they're in very early school. Let's hope it works, because I've heard commentary which supports it, and people say it's not relevant. Finally, there's a role for you and I to play. If tradition requires us to put hurdles in the way of women achieving their true potential, any differently from men, the way men are allowed to, tradition be damned. We have to stand up against such tradition. There are many women who would like to, many men who like to have 2 incomes, but still expect their wife to do all the household chores while they sit on an armchair and say, get me a coffee or get me tea. We have to influence them to change. So if each one of the males in this webinar decides to change one person who is in that category, I think we'll make the world a little better place for women at the workplace. I'm cutting this short because we are running short of time. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for that, Raj. I greatly appreciate your candor bringing out the challenges that I think many organizations face. And I'm leading gender initiatives at ORF. I'd love to have a chat with your son and daughter, who already seem extremely nuanced into the approach of what to do and what not to do. Let me now turn to Aditi Rathore, who is part of the ORF family, and she's going to be presenting her policy paper, where she, I think, has been taking a deep dive into many of these subjects and has lots to share. Aditi.
Thank you, Mitali. Since all of you have already spoken so eloquently about a lot of initiatives that you have taken in your own companies and what more you can do, I thought I'd make my interventions about the overall current female urban labor force participation trends and the policy prescriptions that can be made to increase it, especially in terms of things like urban planning. People have already touched upon in some way that to increase and sustain a larger female urban workforce, creches and sanitary hygienic toilets in workplaces should be made a statutory condition, regardless of things like company turnover or the number of female employees in a company, which is sometimes the case. And this care at work would involve employers being mandated by government policy to provide these necessities and perhaps incentivizing the efficient delivery of care facilities that support these working women. And I'd just like to highlight as well that so far we've been talking about these successful gender-friendly workspaces at the formal workspace. But in India, most women partake in home-based work, are self-employed, or work in the informal sector. And among women workers, informal workers account for 54.8% of the workforce. So a way to formalize this would be if urban bodies that are responsible for livelihood missions and skilling missions prioritize gender-balanced skilling initiatives and job opportunities. And a way this can be done is by creating a skill gap database through which growing sectors of employment, which can be found out, can be tied with these skilling courses, and beneficiaries of the courses can be specifically targeted to feed these sectors. And this is why we would definitely need a strong public-private partnership to create this solid loop. For example, the e-commerce business is a booming sector, but you see very little female delivery personnel. If you visit the go-downs and delivery hubs of a lot of these places, you see that they're all men working there, though this work is just sorting and labeling, which is, a lot of people say that it's heavy lifting and women can't do it, but it's not really. So when you see this, you must look around and see, why is this happening? It may be a simple fact that, okay, there isn't a female only hygienic toilet there, and you'd be surprised at how often this happens. So these initiatives to include infrastructure and boost skilling must go hand in hand with infrastructure in public and workspace design in order to boost female labor force participation. As I'm saying, these conversations about urban spaces, public spaces, and workspaces are really not in silos. It's not just about making an office space gender friendly. The surrounding infrastructure that enables a woman to get to that space is also incredibly important. For example, it's known that women access public spaces more when they're in mixed use areas and where commercial establishments are open at all times, because there's activity and safety in numbers. But a lot of times, because this happens when discussions about having gender-friendly infrastructure happens, people wonder if there are enough women in these areas who would warrant making these specific designs, etc. But the point is that they will participate and they will be enabled to claim the space if they have the infrastructure to support it. So these considerations, which include lighting, safe mobility in terms of having alarm buttons, sophisticated GPS tracking, as well as social factors like awareness and capacity building, is crucial. And Ms. Call spoke very eloquently about office conveyance and door-to-door safe dropping women home in second and third shifts after a certain time in the night. But women can and have been harassed at any time of the day in any mobility chain, in the entire chain. So unsafe mobility is a huge reason why women do not travel far distances to go to the workspace. That may be gender friendly. The workspace itself may be gender friendly, and the workspace has everything in place to make their work life comfortable. So like I said, the entire ecosystem needs to be gender friendly, and this involves a lot of stakeholders working together. And speaking of ecosystems, in Mumbai, for example, the civic body has reserved places in several wards to build multi-purpose houses for working women in commercial areas and near education institutions, which include childcare facilities and even entrepreneurial training centers. And these centers are deliberately created in areas of high visibility, such as markets and railway stations, account for the safety element that I spoke about earlier. And this is definitely a good step. But we have this tendency to look at, okay, this space is already safe for women. Let's make this place where women can kind of congregate and have a working women's hostels, etc. But we need to make these so-called unsafe spaces better as well, which includes, like I said, lighting, CCTV surveillance being some of the ways in which this can be done. I know there's a whole other debate about there should be less CCTV surveillance and we don't want to become a surveillance state. But CCTV cameras and lighting go far in making women feel safer and enable them to participate in a city's life. So cities need to first ensure that its citizens feel safe from various antisocial behaviors. And for this, safety audits in the form of a city map of areas where crime is known to be high and the factors that contribute to it, like lack of lighting, a sparse population, should be made, and then focused interventions in these areas can be made to increase women's accessibility and participation in the city life. So since we're running out of time, and I'll end with this, and I'm looking forward concluding remarks and any questions that Mitali may have. Back to you, Mitali.
Aditi, thank you so much for that. I am conscious of time as well, so I'm going to dive right into it, perhaps with a couple of concrete takeaways for everyone who's joined in. Chandrakant, I want to turn to you first on the very important point that you made about mentorship, because I've spoken about that frequently as well, and how important it is, especially for men at a senior position who often shrug their shoulders and say, look, I know it's bad, but what can I do to fix it? How has your mentorship program been structured, and how do you ensure feedback, both from those who are mentees and from those who are, kind of giving guidance?
So thanks, Mitali. So what we have done, we have upgraded our mentorship program from pure mentorship and coaching to sponsorship. So there is a complete view and complete free exchange of ideas and their career discussions, because unless we make this a longer relationship or association for the mentee and the mentor or the sponsor, it doesn't work. So it's very important there is continuity. So despite the role changes, because we work in a multinational, so role changes are very common. Despite the role changes, if we can maintain this mentoring relationship, that works very well. And we have seen that when the senior leaders, they have a visibility whether their career is taking progression or not. It is very important. And especially when we are trying to get more women in the boardroom, there is a phase when we will have to do more and very consciously. And just to give you an example, when we interview for senior positions, there are always women interviewers in the team. And secondly, if we find two candidates, one woman and one man, which have equal skills and equal capability for the role, we will go for the woman. These kind of changes have to be done and implemented, and that's why this mentoring and skilling program is extremely important. And again, taking the feedback from the women, whether they are feeling comfortable with the program, whether they are getting the right attention or not, is extremely important.
Thank you so much for that. Anupama, I love the point that you had to make about how you're going deeper into looking at inclusion, and you're absolutely right. Diversity is a rainbow. So I'm really glad you're looking at it in all its parameters. I want to shine the light a little bit though on what a post-COVID world looks like, because there are realities of how we have emerged from there, especially as women in the workforce. As a company, are you thinking, deeper about what your productivity expectations now are in an environment where women are working from home and working in, largely much more difficult circumstances? Are you also looking at how to retweak performance reviews? And equally, if I may add a third leg to that, are you looking at mental health?
So thank you for that question, Mitali, because I'll begin with the mental health, because that's the key point right now that Cummins as our organization is strongly focusing on. The pandemic made us realize that the lines between the professional and personal life had completely blurred, and for both men and women, but more for women, especially looking into the social fabric of India, where some of the panelists rightly said that the expectation continues to be more from women than from men. So we have launched a campaign which we call It's Okay. We already have a tie-up with an organization where you can get counseling, but we are now emphasizing and encouraging employees to talk about their mental health, obviously very confidentially. It doesn't really need to reach to us. So that's a huge focus area for us as an organization. The second area that pandemic has really made us realize is the so-called relocation. Now, Cummins went through a tough economic period, but at the same time, we really delivered results by the end of the year. And we realized that working from home was just a mindset. Employees delivered very well, very good results. So we are really shifting on redefining which are the jobs that need to be done permanently offsite, a hybrid of a combination of offsite, on-site, and very few of them will be done on-site. That's the second element. And what that has really helped us is now the talent base for hiring women has really increased, because we are not looking at relocation as a prerequisite. We've recently hired on the India leadership team 2 roles, and both the roles are being done, one from Bangalore. There's a women talent that we have hired, and she's going to operate from Bangalore. Another, there's a male talent that we have hired who's going to really work from Mumbai. Though we've had this practice even in the past where leaders have operated from their place of convenience, and we've not really always emphasized on relocation. But pandemic has really made us realize the importance of getting the talent base larger, because you can deliver from wherever you are, and we Cummins actually moved on measuring performance based on deliverables rather than the hours that you spend on. So not long back, it has nothing to do with pandemic. So for us, from a performance management cycle, nothing actually changes. We had already worked on that mindset years back. So it continues to be there. It just gets strengthened. And we continue to sensitize our leaders around it.
Thank you for sharing that. I think there's a lot of, important information there in terms of how to start rethinking a universe post-COVID. Priyadarshini, it's no secret that your organization is a monolith of an organization, 10 industry groups, as you said. It's important, of course, to look back at the history that you have. It's also important to look forward in terms of, what the future might hold. And I want to bring in the point about automation and the risk that women face from there. Most studies suggest that by 2030, which is not a far shot from here, as many as 130 million women might actually be pushed out of the workforce courtesy automation. This is, of course, to also do with the fact that women are so severely underrepresented in STEM. What are you doing as an organization in order to ensure that women are continuously skilled, as also learning new skills, something they've not learned still, in order to remain in the workforce and to remain relevant? You're on mute.
Yeah. Again, as I said, for me to answer this is every industry segment has a different process that follows and a different approach that follows. However, I will give you an overall bit. I think AI is the future of work, right? And I think not only women, but both men and women will lose their jobs. Going ahead, I think our organizations will start looking like an hourglass rather than looking like a pyramid. And there will be huge number of job losses that will happen. I don't know if job losses will happen, but it will be a different way of connecting and engaging with the talent. So we may not have full-time roles, but we may have gig economy that would come up, and which is already coming up in many spaces, which will kind of eat into those full-time roles, or ways in which you would engage with people. Secondly, you talked about upskilling. Again, recently we were doing a little bit of research and work around the gig economy and the future of work. And many experts around the world said that, like you have EQ and IQ, TQ will become one of the most important. And when I say TQ, it's technology quotient, right? How well can you handle technology? And when I say this, I'm talking of across the hierarchy. I'm talking of the shop floor. I'm talking of the middle level. I'm talking of the board levels also, right? So at one end, you will have jobs, but your engagement with the talent will change. We'll see drastic changes. At a second level, there will be a need of this TQ, which will become almost hygiene for all of us. All of us, when I say, even for us, for me, I think for all of us on this panel, it will become almost mandatory to have a certain amount of TQ in us. So I think these two are these are realities that are in front of us. How we are approaching it, I would say, I think digitization is something at the Tata Group that we are kind of working on at a very, very large and a very critical way. In terms of, automating a lot of processes. And again, when I say processes, please try and understand, for us, every company has their own process. So a Titan will deal with it very differently than Tata Motors. And at a group center, we do not mandate that Tata Motors and Titan do exactly the same thing. That is not the idea. The idea is each of them look at automation the way they need it. It needs to be local. For us, yes, we need to be aware that these realities are coming in, and probably coming in much sooner than we expected it to happen. Had COVID not hit us, maybe we would be a little more in a comfortable space, but I think this has accentuated a lot of things with digitization and automation. Like Adupama said, there will be roles. I mean, we're all talking about roles which can be hybrid roles, roles on site and roles off site, right? This is going to become the norm, right? In the whole space, so about each company would need to decide. However, from us, technology in terms of processes as well as helping people cope with that change is something that we are working on. Again, it is probably just, I think everyone's just figuring things out. I wouldn't say we have this whole plan and a blueprint in place and we are going ahead and doing that. No, I don't think any one of us have. We really don't even know 3 months later whether we'll all survive or not. Right? In this space, I think being responsive, being open and being very aware of what reality is here and now is important, and that's what we are doing currently.
Wonderful. Raj, like I said, I really appreciated the candor you brought to the conversation because I think you reflect perhaps a large reality that exists outside of a very small ideal environment. I want to pivot from what it is that you want, what you want to do for the women versus what organizations should be doing in their outward communication. And I'm taking, a post-COVID era again when I ask you this question. Have companies been open enough with their employees and the women employees in terms of information about the company's financial situation, in terms of whether or not layoffs will or will not happen, in terms of whether or not emergency grants or stipends will be provided to women who may have that particular need, post living through a pandemic and perhaps job losses within the family structure as well? Have companies done enough in terms of communicating with their female workforce?
Is that a question to me?
Yes, it is to you.
Okay. I'll answer this question for our companies and probably what we're seeing among clients separately. As far as our companies are concerned, we took a decision in April itself that every month there will be a town hall where every employee, irrespective of whether they're at the non-executive level or a consultant and above, will be attending the meeting, and they'll get a full idea of the financials for that month and cumulative till that. And what plans are there? How, if X happens, how will we manage? If Y happens, what will we manage? So throughout this pandemic, we've been able to take all the three companies, the people through what is happening. Earlier, we used to report on a half-yearly basis what the financials were. And then at the end of the year, on the same day, 31st March, we used to explain the whole year's financials. But now we're doing it every month. I don't think this is a common practice, but we know at least two clients who have been communicating very, very, very well. So I can't talk about how companies at large have been doing it, but we felt we should do it. And one more reason is, before COVID happened, we took a view that we have to work to a situation that in 12 months, we should have the theoretical capability of 50% of people working from home. The whole idea was to see how to tap two types of talent. One is talent which lives outside the 4 metros where we have offices. They're very good, talented people, male or female, it doesn't matter. So we've had situations where they say, oh, no, we would love to join, but my wife has a job and she can't leave, and she doesn't have a possibility of getting a transfer, so I can't take the job. So if we said, look, 50% of the employees can work from wherever they are in India or anywhere in the world, then it means we can get the right talent. The second reason we wanted was to see how to tap a very, very important resource. That is, women who have given up their job and career for a time being, for whatever reason, family reasons mostly, and are now coming back and finding it difficult to get back. And they're extremely talented people available, women, who it's such a loss for companies for not tapping them. I'll give an instance. I live in a large complex with it's a gated community, and there was an email from a very talented person who is an engineer from IIT Bombay. She's done from, I have passed from IIM Calcutta or Kolkata. She worked as the head of analytics in a company in the US, and she and her husband has come back. And she's got little children, she can't take a job. That's what she felt. So she wrote in the email, do any children want to get tuition in mathematics? I suddenly saw this email, I said, what is she doing? Going to give tuitions in mathematics? She should be doing something greater. So we have an analytics company, I just called her up and said, look, don't mind my calling you. We have the flexibility to work for you to join us, whether you want to 2 hours per day or 6 hours one day and one hour another day. Let's talk about it. You talk to our HR and talk to the head of analytics, and we'll figure out a way. She has become one of the most important resources we've ever had. She's been with us for 5 years now, and she's been increasing her percentage of time to 100% now. Amazing talent. Imagine we would have lost it, and the society would have lost it, and we'd have had a tuition teacher. And there are any number of such people. So that's what we're trying to do.
Wonderful. Also not a very bad outcome. It's great to pass on any knowledge to the younger kids. David, you've been a silent listener, soaking it all in. I thought I might draw you into the conversation as well. There was an interesting point raised earlier about the role of the state within this conversation that we're having. Is this now not about a smaller organization, and is it really something the state should take on as an imperative? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, clearly governments have a role to play in encouraging diversity and inclusion. I'm going to be talking tomorrow at an event on disability rights about the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was a land-breaking piece of legislation passed 30 years ago in the US that requires workplaces to have accommodations for people with disabilities, and has significantly increased access for people with disabilities in educational facilities, workplace. Most, I would suspect, the vast majority of countries have laws that ban discrimination and discrimination on the basis of gender, discrimination on the basis of ethnicity, race, in some cases now also LGBTQ people. So I think all that is valuable. At the same time, and for example, India recently passed the law extending maternal rights, maternal leave. The U.S. government also recently extended for U.S. government employees parental leave. And to be honest with you, we lag far behind the private sector in the U.S. and I think behind the private sector here as well in terms of the parental leave that was available. This new law just extends parental leave for U.S. government employees to 3 months for men and women, which I think before it was 6 weeks required. So this is a significant improvement. I do want to say there are two things. First of all, there can be well-intentioned government interventions that don't actually help the situation. And so, for example, I'm aware that in some places in India, I don't know if it's nationwide or if it's state by state, but there are laws about second and third shifts for women, and I understand why those laws exist, but it's very paternalistic, right? I mean, it should be up to a woman to decide whether she feels comfortable in a certain environment. And companies should not have to deal with, I mean, they should be doing the steps that all of these companies have talked about doing in terms of creating a safe environment for their employees. But it's not up for the government, from my perspective, to say women can't work from the hours of 4 to 12. It should be up to the people to decide themselves whether they want to do it. So that's where I worry about government intervention, because even when it is well-intentioned, and I genuinely believe it's well-intentioned, in this particular case, it is creating a barrier to the entry of women into the workforce that I don't think is an appropriate role necessarily for the government to play. And I'll say one final thing, which is I specifically use the term parental rights because I think it is really important, and we're no great models in the US here, so full acknowledgement here. But I think we need to get rid of the expression maternity rights, maternity leave and paternity leave. It should all be parental leave. It should be offered equally to both the father and the mother, or, as is increasingly going to be the case, the mother and the mother, or the father and the father. And this is not just a question of equity, but it is, also going to address a problem with barriers to women in the workforce, which is that you still have in India, and I think it's true in the US and a lot of other countries as well, concerns if I hire a woman, particularly women of a certain age, I'm going to lose her for 6 months because she's going to have a baby and she's going to leave for 6 months. And so, although it is illegal in the US, and I suspect it's illegal in India as well, it definitely happens that women get disadvantaged from hiring. If this right were available to men and women equally, then there wouldn't be a problem. There would be you couldn't say if I hire this woman, she'll be gone for 6 months, because if you hire the man, theoretically he'll be gone for 6 months as well. Now we do have to face the reality of social norms, which is in the US, just because it's available doesn't mean men are going to avail it. And there are certainly cases where men are discouraged from taking their parental rights. So, we have to change societal norms, and a company who introduces this will not just have to introduce it, but make it very, very clear from the top down that they expect men to take this equally. I had a conversation with a company the other day who even suggested that they might make it mandatory for both men and women, and therefore it just takes entirely out of the individual to choose. But even if you don't want to go that far, which is probably a step too far for most companies, creating an environment where men and women are expected to take parental leave equally, I think will significantly improve the circumstance as well.
Absolutely. I will raise a glass or two to the idea of parental leave. Aditi, I saw all the collective heads of all the panelists nodding while you were walking us through your very cogent points, and I know you've been digging really deep on all that data. What was your big takeaway by the end of it? Was it hope or was it despair? Does it look like there's pockets which can hold out a leading light example, or does it look like everyone's pretty much sinking and the whole lot needs to be pulled up?
No, there's definitely hope. It would be very unfortunate if I said there was no hope, but I do feel like different stakeholders must work together. Like I said, we need better data in order to increase female labor force participation. We need better data on which industries and which employment sectors are saturated by just men or just women, because some sectors are saturated by just women. A lot of skilling initiatives are just, beauty parlors or hospitality services, which women like to work in. But there are so many growing sectors. So I think companies as well as government skilling initiatives need to make these gender agnostic and balance their intake of both women and men in these sectors. And a lot of the people today spoke about using ways in which they've tried to make their design elements gender friendly, like drilling equipment and various equipment. But again, the entire loop of the mobility change of getting to the workspace also needs to look at these things. Like, for example, women using buses, the handrails are too high. A lot of the times that prevents women from, and you know how crowded they are, handrails are required to be used. So that prevents women from traveling, that prevents women from reaching the workspaces that already have these gender friendly elements. A lot of stakeholders, government, urban local bodies, as well as companies need to work together. We need to have public-private partnerships, industry tie-ups, as well, in order to increase this. So yeah, there's hope if everyone works together. Is all I'd say.
Absolutely, and conversations like these can only be a step forward. I'm going to rein it in. Thank you for your patience in holding out, and first and foremost, my deepest thanks to our panelists today for sparing their time, their insight, and really their knowledge for something for everyone who's heard this to take away. My deepest thanks as well to the US Consulate General of Mumbai for reaching out to us, for thinking of doing something like this, and for raising a conversation that really needs to be raised on a consistent basis. And thank you as well to the Indian Merchants Chamber. Just a quick note to those participants who are listening in. There is a short survey that's going to be sent to everyone who registered for this talk, and we'd love to hear from you just to gauge the learnings that you took away from our interaction. I'm going to wind it down. There's a weekend that approaches. So thank you everybody who joined in for your time and your patience and your thoughts. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.